Philip II of Macedon built an empire, trained Alexander the Great, and changed history. But some say he also holds another title: the most licentious king who ever lived. Was he really that wild? Or is it all talk? Let's dig into the rumors, the facts, and the truth behind one of history's most controversial rulers. Philip II of Macedon was not born into a strong and powerful kingdom. When he became king in 359 BCE, Macedon was in trouble. Enemies were attacking from every side, and the country was weak and divided. But Philip was not the kind of man to give up. This guy looked at a complete disaster and said, "Hold my wine, I've got this." He took control of the mess and turned it into something great. He started by fixing things at home. The Macedonian nobles were always fighting each other, and no one respected the king. Philip changed that. He used smart deals, marriages, and even threats to bring everyone under his rule. Once the local problems were handled, he focused on the bigger goal: taking control of Greece. Because why settle for fixing your own backyard when you can annex the neighbors? Now here's where things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean Philip basically became the guy who figured out how to win at everything. The Greek city-states were always fighting among themselves. Athens, Sparta, and Thebes could never agree on anything. Philip saw this as a chance to take over, and he did it step by step. He didn't rush in. He waited, made deals, and took advantage of every argument between the Greek cities. It was like being the friend who stays sober at a party and collects everyone's embarrassing secrets. One of Philip's smartest moves was changing the way his army worked. While other armies were still playing with regular spears, Philip said, "What if we made them really, really long?" He gave his soldiers a new weapon called the sarissa. It was a very long spear, much longer than what other armies used. His soldiers lined up in tight rows and moved together like one big wall of sharp points. This new formation, called the phalanx, was strong and hard to beat. Philip also trained his soldiers very well. He didn't want a bunch of fighters who only knew how to swing swords. He wanted discipline. His army could move fast, follow orders, and work together. He also used cavalry, archers, and foot soldiers all at once, which made his army even stronger. Battles became easier to win, and his enemies didn't stand a chance. But here's the thing about Philip. He was just as dangerous in the bedroom as he was on the battlefield. And by bedroom, I mean the political negotiation room. Philip fought with words, gold, and clever plans. Writers like Diodorus Siculus and Plutarch said that Philip was very good at using diplomacy. He knew how to talk people into doing what he wanted. He made friends with powerful leaders, offered them gifts, and promised peace. Many times, those leaders didn't even see the trap until it was too late. Philip also used marriage as a way to gain power. He married several women, and each one came from an important family. These marriages helped him build alliances with other rulers. It had nothing to do with love. It was all about power, land, and control. Think of it like collecting trading cards, except the cards are wives and the prize is world domination. At one time, he had 7 wives, and each one was part of his plan. Bribery was another tool Philip liked to use. He gave gold to the right people at the right time. If a city could not be taken by force, he bought its leaders. Many Greek politicians changed sides after receiving gifts from Philip. He made sure his money worked as hard as his soldiers. When talking and bribing didn't work, Philip had no problem using force. He could be very harsh. If a city stood against him, he destroyed it. One example is the city of Olympus. When they turned against him, Philip crushed the city and left nothing behind. It was a warning to others not to fight him. But don't think Philip was just some angry guy with a sword. Philip was not cruel without reason. He believed in rewards and punishments. If you were loyal, he treated you well. If you betrayed him, he made sure you never did it again. This helped him keep control over the areas he conquered. The most important moment in Philip's rule came in 338 BCE. This is where Philip basically said, "Game over" to all of Greece. At the Battle of Chaeronea, he defeated the Greek city-states that had joined together to stop him. His son Alexander, who would later become famous as Alexander the Great, fought beside him in this battle. After the win, Philip created the League of Corinth. This group of city-states looked like a friendly alliance, but Philip was the one in charge. Philip also used religion to make his actions seem right. He told people he was leading a holy war against Persia to protect all of Greece. Many people believed him, and this helped him get more support. He turned war into a shared cause, not just a personal goal. Compared to other rulers at the time, Philip was different. Some leaders cared about honor or tradition. Philip cared about success. He used any method that worked. He didn't need to be liked. He needed to win. Philip was not perfect. He could be brutal, proud, and sometimes careless. But he was also smart, brave, and full of energy. He turned a weak kingdom into the most powerful force in Greece. His army, his politics, and his leadership changed history. Philip II of Macedon didn't just play the Game of Thrones, he rewrote the rules, then married half the kingdom while doing it. His personal life was as chaotic as his battle plans, full of grand moves, sharp turns, and family drama that would make any modern reality show producer weep with joy. According to ancient sources like Athenaeus, Philip had at least 7 wives. That's not a typo. 7. But he wasn't simply being romantic. Each of those marriages came with a political cost or advantage. He used marriage like a Swiss army knife, to gain allies, calm enemies, and sometimes just to flex his power. His most famous wife was Olympias, the mother of Alexander the Great. And let me tell you, this woman was not someone you wanted to mess with. She came from Epirus, and marrying her helped Philip lock down a powerful connection with her homeland. Olympias was no quiet queen either. She was strong-willed, deeply spiritual, and fiercely loyal to her son. In some ways, she was a queen who matched Philip's energy, a rare thing in those days. But things didn't stay smooth between them. Later in life, Philip married a much younger woman named Cleopatra Eurydice. And no, this wasn't just a midlife crisis. Cleopatra was Macedonian nobility. And by marrying her, Philip tightened his grip on the local elites. But this move sparked a firestorm at home. Olympias felt betrayed. Alexander, already walking in his father's long shadow, saw it as a direct threat. After all, if Cleopatra had a son, Alexander's claim to the throne could easily be pushed aside. Tensions boiled. According to Plutarch, Alexander once got into a heated argument with his father during a wedding feast. The fight was so intense that Alexander left Macedon with his mother and stayed away until Philip begged him to return. It was royal family drama with the stakes turned all the way up. This was about who would rule next, who held the power and the future of an entire empire. Now, about Philip's affairs, yes, they happened. But despite his reputation, ancient sources don't really paint him as out of control. They mention his flings, but they don't act like he was throwing wild parties every night. The guy was too busy conquering Greece to spend all his time partying. Compared to other kings and tyrants in history, Philip's personal life was messy, but not shockingly scandalous. He wasn't the type to completely neglect his duties for pleasure. His reputation for being licentious likely comes more from the number of marriages than anything else. 7 wives sounds crazy until you realize each one was basically a peace treaty with legs. But the truth is, Philip was doing what kings did back then, securing loyalty with rings instead of just swords. Every marriage was a chess move. A wife meant a new alliance. A new alliance meant fewer wars, more power, and better control over the scattered regions of Greece. If Tinder existed back then, his profile might have said, Conqueror, Master of Alliances, looking for matches that benefit the kingdom. Even with all the drama at home, Philip kept the kingdom steady. He handled wars and family fights like a guy juggling fire. He knew when to be charming and when to be ruthless. He used both love and fear, switching between them like a pro. Even his enemies gave him credit because they could tell he was always 5 steps ahead. Philip II lived in a time when the rules around love, marriage, and relationships were a lot more flexible than today. In ancient Macedonia and the wider Greek world, people didn't follow one fixed model for what relationships should look like. Marriages were mostly about power, family ties, and politics. Love was a bonus if it showed up at all. This wasn't the age of soulmates and dating apps. It was the age of alliances sealed with rings, land, and sometimes a good sword. Philip's many marriages may seem wild by today's standards, but they were completely normal for someone in his position. Rulers were expected to marry for strategy, not for love. In the Greek world, especially among elites and soldiers, same-sex bonds weren't just accepted. They were sometimes admired. Yeah, you heard that right. In Life of Pelopidas, Plutarch talks about the sacred band of Thebes, an elite group of soldiers made up of male lovers. Their loyalty to one another made them fierce in battle. This wasn't seen as strange. In fact, the idea was that love made you fight harder for your partner. These kinds of relationships were common in aristocratic circles, especially among young men being mentored by older men. It was part of the education and coming-of-age process. So when some modern writers paint Philip as unusually wild or immoral, they're often looking at the past through today's lens. Back then, Philip wasn't doing anything that would make people gasp. Having multiple wives was completely normal. Strong emotional or romantic bonds with other men were accepted too. Extra affairs on the side were practically expected for someone in his position. There's also no strong evidence in ancient sources that Philip's behavior was outrageous, even for his time. Most of the drama came from his family issues, not from his love life. His marriage to Cleopatra Eurydice upset Olympias and Alexander, who felt threatened by the new queen's status. That tension was real, but it had more to do with succession and power than romance. People weren't whispering behind Philip's back about how many lovers he had. They were talking about who would get the throne. Modern takes sometimes spin Philip's personal life into something scandalous. It makes for juicy headlines and dramatic documentaries, but the ancient sources don't support that angle. Writers like Diodorus, Plutarch, and even Demosthenes, who hated Philip, focused more on his politics and wars. They weren't shocked by his relationships. If anything, they seemed more annoyed by his military moves than his marriages. It's also important to remember that public and private life weren't so separate in those days. A king's bedroom might affect politics, but it wasn't judged the way it is now. Personal choices were part of how leaders built alliances and showed power. The idea of keeping love and leadership separate just didn't exist. In fact, a well-timed marriage or romantic connection could change the fate of a whole city. So when people today call Philip II the most immoral king in history, they're likely judging him by modern standards. He was probably passionate. He definitely used marriage as a strategy, but he wasn't extreme for his time. He was just playing the game, and he played it well. The real scandal for Philip was who hated him for it. His choices rattled people not because they were immoral, but because they shifted power. When Cleopatra Eurydice came into the picture, Olympias packed her bags and left the palace. Alexander followed soon after. That fallout had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with politics. So, people say Philip II of Macedon was the most licentious king in history. That's a big title. Bigger than just being the father of Alexander the Great. Bigger than beating Athens and Thebes. No. Apparently the man who reformed an entire military and united a wild land of clashing tribes also had a bedroom reputation that made the tabloids of his time blush, if they'd had tabloids. Many stories claim Philip lived larger than life, even more wildly than the Roman emperors. Now it's time to examine that crown of excess closely and see who truly earned the title. First, let's be honest, royalty being messy isn't new. You've got Roman emperors like Caligula and Nero who turned wild living into an Olympic sport. Caligula once reportedly made his horse a priest. Nero burned down parts of Rome and then sang about it in costume. These guys lived fast, throwing gasoline on the fire and dancing in the ashes. Now compare that to Philip, who, for all his marriages and strategic bedroom decisions, still had a full-time job running an empire and preparing his son for world domination. Not quite the same level of chaos. Even in more modern history, we've got kings like Louis XV of France, who filled palaces with mistresses like it was a season of The Bachelor Versailles edition. He had entire wings of Versailles buzzing with gossip and perfumes, like a royal influencer house. Compared to that, Philip's multiple marriages and political flings start looking less like scandal and more like standard procedure. A little messy, sure, but not headline-breaking by ancient standards. And now, a big reason why Philip gets painted with this wild brush is that people love to exaggerate the personal lives of powerful men. Especially when those men shook the world, it's easier to picture them as larger than life in every way. But the actual sources don't tell wild stories like they do with Nero. In fact, most of the old writers, Diodorus, Plutarch, and even Athenaeus, spent more time talking about Philip's military genius, his brutal diplomacy, and his unstoppable reforms than about what he was doing after dark. The focus was almost always on his leadership, not his sheets, and that's important. Because if Philip really had been that outrageous, the ancient writers would have loved it. Suetonius, who wrote juicy stories about Roman emperors, had no filter. If Philip had been hosting wild orgies or doing anything worth gasping over, someone would have written it down in gold ink. But that's not what we see. Sure, he had many wives, at least 7 that we know of, but that wasn't weird back then. That was politics. Kings married to secure peace, grab land, and make alliances. Marrying someone's daughter was like signing a treaty with extra steps. Let me break this down for you. Yes, Philip had affairs, and yes, his relationship with Olympias, Alexander's mom, got rocky, especially after he married Cleopatra Eurydice. That caused drama, especially with Alexander. But drama doesn't equal decadence. That's just royal family tension. The kind you'd expect in any household where power, ego, and inheritance were all on the dinner table. It's more like an ancient version of a reality show reunion special than a sign of wild immorality. There's also a big thing to remember here. People in the ancient world didn't see things the way we do today. Same-sex relationships, for example, were common in Greek aristocratic and military circles. Having lovers outside marriage didn't always raise eyebrows. What mattered more was whether you could keep control, win battles, and leave a strong legacy. Philip did all that with style. He won wars, he built cities, he turned Macedonia from a backwater kingdom into a serious empire. So if he had a few flings along the way, nobody cared unless it affected his grip on power. Modern takes often grab the smallest hints and turn them into full-blown scandals. Philip gets lumped into the party king category, often with zero context. It's like judging a CEO today based on some spicy DMs without looking at the billion-dollar company he runs. People love dirt more than they love nuance, and Philip's story has been twisted over time to make him sound like a drunken playboy. The truth is messier, but also a bit duller. Most of the juicy stuff is that it doesn't show up until much later, when people are already romanticizing or demonizing the past. Ancient gossip has a way of mutating, especially when historians try to spice it up for newer generations. Somewhere along the line, Philip's list of political marriages turned into a myth about his supposed wild appetites. And once people decide you're the licentious king, it sticks, whether it's true or not. The real Philip was complex, like really complex. He was brilliant, ruthless, charming when it suited him, and a cold strategist when it didn't. He didn't waste time. He made deals in bed and on battlefields, whichever got the job done faster. He knew how to use power, and if that meant marrying someone to tie up a political deal, he did it. But he not only leaves behind orgy lists or secret diaries of scandal, he left armies, alliances, and a son who became one of the most famous men in history. So does Philip deserve the title of most licentious? Not really. At worst, he was a strategic womanizer. At best, he was just doing what every powerful king did, only better. If history had a gossip column, Philip might make it a few times, but he wouldn't dominate it. That spot goes to the likes of Nero and Louis XV, who turned excess into art forms. Philip's reputation deserves a little respect. The guy built an empire while dealing with family drama that would break most people. He was tough, smart, and far more focused on conquest than pleasure. The stories that made him sound like a wild man, they're more smoke than fire. The truth is, the king knew how to work the game. And if a few romantic detours helped him along the way, well, that's just politics in ancient armor. Philip II was more of a warlord than a wild child. The man built empires, crushed rivals, and handled his drama like a pro. The rumors? Mostly smoke. If you're into gritty history without the fluff, like share and subscribe. There's more where that came from. Real stories, real people, no sugarcoating.